Put your phones away, no texting during class, okay? Alright, so I am Professor Schorow, and we are going to have our Teddy Talk next. So we're going to talk sex and zoning. Next. So, this is my book. It's for sale back there, little shameless plug. Next. Okay, so the combat. Who in the class has heard of the combat zone? Who knows? Okay, so you did the reading. You did the reading. Very good. For those of you who don't, the combat zone was a very important part of Boston history, as evidenced by the Combat Zone Charter School that was featured in a Simpsons episode about Boston. Next. So, let's take a trip back to the 1970s, the 1980s, to a place called the Combat Zone. Next. So where was the Combat Zone? No, it wasn't off in the corner somewhere. It was right in the middle of the city. Here is approximately where it was. Downtown Crossing was right there. Lloyd Washington Street. Chinatown was over there. Neyland Street. New England Medical Center. So you've got to understand the Combat Zone was not tucked away. It was there for everyone to see. Next. Here is a look at the Washington Street in the late 1970s. We have your Pussycat Theater, yeah, Pilgrim Theater, X-rated movie theaters, and notice people in the bell-bottoms. Very nice, very nice. Okay, next. So where did the name Combat Zone come from? Well, probably because during the 1950s, Boston was in a real economic downturn. And there, in this area of downtown Boston, there were a lot of bars, a lot of rough bars, and sailors and soldiers would go there and get into fights, and the police were always being called in. So a judge in 1951 called it a combat zone, and the name stuck. Let's go. So what were the services? What happened in the combat zone? Next. Okay, first of all, it's a place to see X-rated movies. Now remember, in the 1970s, this was a time we call porno chic. And that was when The Devil Miss Jones came out, Deep Throat. Anyone seen Deep Throat? Deep Throat? Deep Throat was the first X-rated movie you could take a date to. That's what it was called. So there were a lot of these X-rated movies, but where did you see them? You saw them in the combat zone. Next. It was also a place to stock up on your pornography. You couldn't order it from Amazon. Why? There was no Amazon. You had to go to a bookstore. How many people have been to a bookstore? You had to go to a bookstore and buy it. So that was a place you could stock up on your pornography. Next. It was a place where you could go to peep shows. For a mere 25 cents, you could get a film strip of a lot of naughty activities. The floor might be a little bit sticky, but it was very economical. Next. And of course, there were the clubs where they featured girls, the exotic dancers, the strippers, the striptease, the topless bars, and all that. That was the real engine that carried the combat zone along. Next. So one of the most famous of these clubs, and there are a whole bunch of them in the combat zone, quite a few tucked in this area, was something called the Naked Eye, that featured totally nude college girl reviews, as if college. So all you college graduates, you had something to look forward to in this, especially you English majors. Okay. The totally tasteful logo of the Naked Eye right in downtown Boston. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? Next. Okay, but the combat zone with all these activities was also a red light district. And there were prostitutes of all ages, all sexes, plying the streets. In fact, it was quite a scene at night because they would actually go up and solicit right out of the cars. And this was part of the whole combat zone experience. Next. So, the combat zone lasted from roughly the 1960s to late 1980s. At its height, there were 35 adult entertainment businesses, all located in this 5 to 6 blocks. It was packed right into the heart of Boston, near Chinatown, near the downtown, near businesses, geez, near a high school. It had it all right in that area. Next. So, about this time, the city planner said, hey, we need to build a new Boston. Urban renewal. We've got to make this city better. It was an economic downturn. And we're not going to be able to do that if there's this oasis of sexuality right in the heart of the city. So what are they going to do about it? They can't close it all down because the Supreme Court said no. Arthur Miller versus California. One of my graduate students just mentioned that earlier this evening. But basically, there's a little thing called the First Amendment, and the First Amendment protects unpleasant speech, even pornography, as long as it conforms to community standards. Speaking of the Supreme Court, hold in there, Ruth Ginsburg, don't die. Okay, moving on. So, because you could not just close everything down, they would do the next best thing. They would zone for it. They would create an adult entertainment district in 1974 right in the heart of downtown. This is the official map of the district. And the idea was, if we put all the businesses, the pornographic businesses, the sex clubs, in this area, then we can not have them elsewhere. In other words, we can keep them out of South Boston. We can keep them out of Beacon Hill, God forbid, and out of Back Bay. Barney Frank was part of that. Barney Frank pushed for this. By the way, he represented Back Bay at the time, so he was kind of helping his constituency and pushing freedom of speech. Okay, moving on. Next. Okay, so the city was not just going to zone, not going to just zone and forget about it. They were going to work with the clubs. They were going to work with the bookstores. This is the cover of an official city document that looked at what this new combat zone would look like. What happens in Boston stays in Boston. That was the idea. So this is from an official document. Next. This is another official document. This is the way that we're looking up Boylston Street now. This is what it was going to look like. And they would even design for things like dirty bookstores called, next, the Dirty Bookshop. Because why not? This is an official document. Okay, but the architects of this got a little bit carried away. Next. This is from an official city document that went out temporarily until the head of the BRA said, no, you didn't, and so this was recalled. So this is an example of a only city document I know that has been censored for pornography. Next. Now, Boston's solution to this led this nation. Just like we led people in the revolution with the Tea Party, we led the nation how to deal with sex and pornography by creating a zone for it. So We Magazine, how many people remember We Magazine? Anyway, they came to Boston and decided to do an expose on the Boston's erogenous zone. Don't you like the skyline there? It really looks very good. Okay, so, next. Next. Now, class. Who is this woman? She is the most famous stripper in American political history. No, not Stormy Daniels. Anybody know who this was? Okay, you have to do your study. Okay, next. It was a woman named Fanny Fox. Next, who had a dalliance with this gentleman, Wilbur Mills. Wilbur Mills, at this time in the 1970s, was one of the most powerful men in Washington, head of the Ways and Means Committee. You couldn't do anything in Washington without his approval. But one night, Mr. Mills was in a car that was driving erratically on the highway in Washington, D.C. Cops pulled it over. A woman jumped out of the car into the tidal basin. That was Fanny Fox, otherwise known as the Argentine Firecracker, and was one of the strippers in the Washington, D.C. area. And Mr. Mills said, oh, I can explain that she is a constituent. I am helping her as I would help any other constituent. What's nothing to see here, move along. Okay, that was okay until next. Fanny Fox, now under the name The Tidal Basin Bombshell, was performing all over the country, including at the Pilgrim Theater in Boston, in the Comment Zone. And here was her performance one night, and guess who joined her on stage? Wilbur Mills walked out. And that was the end of Wilbur Mills' political career. Today, he would be president. Okay, so let's talk about Princess Cheyenne was one of the most famous dancers, and let's call them dancers in this period. She was actually called the thinking man stripper because she had amazing costumes, amazing elaborate routines. In fact, some of the routines, especially in the Comment Zone in the early days, were elaborate, fantastical, somewhat as you saw here tonight. Beautiful costumes. Also, no touch. The other thing that there was no poles, no pole dancing. Men or in the audience could not touch the dancers. No slipping money into G-strings. Could not even touch them. But the dancers would do these elaborate things. There was someone named Machine Gun Kelly, for example, who used to. And there was a woman who danced in a champagne cup, and there was a woman who danced with a boa constrictor because she was used to dealing with reptiles. So, but the thing was, the dancers had to mingle in the audience and get people to buy overpriced drinks. That was the price for dancing. So let's be very clear, class, very clear. The dancing in that days was the male gaze kind of dancing. It wasn't something like you'd see today. Next. So, anyone here of Hetty Jo Starr? Hetty Jo Starr was one of the famous designers of clothes for women. Next, because the dancers in those days had these beautiful, elaborate costumes. These are some of from her collections. They would end up on the floor by the end of the dance, end of the routine, but they were gorgeous. The women there the dancers were goddesses. That's how they presented themselves. Next. So, Hetty Jo Starr was responsible for this costume. This is Miss Bicentennial from 1976, a woman named Julie Jordan, who was responsible for an amazing activity during the Bicentennial. Next, she performed at City Hall Plaza a patriotic strip to the tune of John Philip Sousa. And here she is, pictures from the newspapers there. Next. She's a beautiful woman. In fact, she came to one of my events, so she's great. So there she is, Miss Julie Jordan. Okay, so the Combat Zone's not here. Not here. So what happened to it? Well, one thing was the Chinatown community said, why did you put it near our community? Why not put it in Back Bay or South Boston? Could we say racism? Yeah. So the Chinese community said, okay, let's start protesting against it, and they did. Next. There was also the death of a Harvard student in the zone, which was a very sobering event, which woke up a lot of people that this was quite dangerous. This was a quite dangerous place. Next. But one other reason, the VCR. Remember the VCR? How many people remember VCRs? Okay, well the VCR with its ready access to home movies, to high quality pornography, took the act of pornography from a public place to a private place. So mom and dad can send the kids off to bed, put in the VCR, put in a tape, and they're good to go, so to speak. Okay, that was one reason. Next reason, development finally started coming along. So you finally had development, and that started to drive out a lot of the porno theaters and a lot of the bookstores. Next, and then the final blow, so to speak, was of course the internet, where everything you wanted was right in your own hand, including prostitution. So that was another blow to the Combat Zone. Next. So this is the Combat Zone today. Not a trace. This is the same view looking up there. Pussycat Theater is long gone. Sorry, guys. Okay, next. But there are still 2 strip clubs left. One is the Glass Slipper, which should have a historical plaque because it's 30 years old. It's one of the oldest strip clubs in the area, and the other is a more of a chain centerfolds. And I'll tell you, I did go there to these clubs for research purposes. And I can assure you, class, that at centerfolds, not even the sight of a completely naked, completely shaved woman writhing around on a stage will keep a man from looking at his cell phone. So that is the story of the Combat Zone, very short. If you want to see me perform any of the numbers that I learned about, you have to come to the final exam. So thank you very much.